allowing conclusions, tackling subjects wrapped with misinformation.
It's okay to disagree, but what's not okay is that we refuse to communicate civilly with each other.
Giving skeptics the chance to ask the questions.
The number one question is,
how would you define critical race theory?
And then tell us what they learned.
It was not the big picture.
Today's episode, The Election Skeptic. After everything you've learned, are you still skeptical of the 2020 election results? Hi, I'm Andy Parati. Georgia will hold big elections this year for governor and U.S. Senate. But before we go back to the ballot box, some remain skeptical of the state's 2020 presidential results. So we asked one of them to take the wheel of the reporting process to draw their own conclusions.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal! Stop the steal!
I mean, we cannot let them steal this election away from the American people.
A movement of MAGA voters who do not trust Georgia's 2020 election results.
We know a state that's always been red is not blue.
They cheated and they rigged our presidential election.
I'll be darned if they're going to take away our free and fair vote!
One of those skeptics is Mark Nolan.
I am skeptical because, almost every election, there's fraud. Someone will say, well, it's not mass fraud. Well, if you got a history, whether it's 10 people or 10,000 people, fraud is still fraud.
Among his concerns, he doesn't trust the state's mail-in ballot boxes.
Why do we need these special boxes? And there's thousands of them, I understand.
And he has little confidence in Georgia's voter machines or its ability to investigate fraud.
And again, just from my limited knowledge, what I see is that there really isn't any accountability.
Doubtful the 2020 results, but willing to learn more. And over the next few weeks, he'll get his chance. Not from us, but from 4 of the state's top election experts, including Georgia's Secretary of State. Mark's conducting the interviews. He's asking the questions. And then he'll tell us what he learned.
Here he comes.
But first, it's time to get to know Mark. All right, here we go. We met him at his home in Woodstock, Georgia.
Hello.
Hey,
how you doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Mark is 67 years old, married with 2 children, a proud Army veteran, former tech CEO,
Well-struck ball.
and a current football coach who trains kickers trying to get into the NFL.
Good drill working.
A skill that comes naturally for him.
A long field goal.
In 1978, he briefly kicked for the Philadelphia Eagles.
All you gotta do is put both hands out here.
But not so easy for the uncoordinated like myself.
Here we go.
Even under his expertise.
Oh! Well, the object isn't kick the ball. Come on, up!
I think I got like a foot off the ground on that one.
Up! Hey, you made contact. That's awesome.
That actually kind of hurts.
There's no crying and kicking. There's no feelings here. Feelings, nothing more than feelings. There is no feelings.
My feeling of my foot feels like it's broken, so what about those feelings?
Well, those feelings are ice packs. I have one kid I trained who's in 6th grade, who actually won 2 games last
And I'm
year.
sure they're better than me.
And they are better than you.
Time to take a time out from this embarrassment on the field and get back to the subject at hand and why Mark and so many Republicans do not trust Georgia's 2020 election results. Over the past year, Mark repeatedly posted his concerns on social media. The day after the November election, he wrote, "Power-hungry DNC politicians have stolen elections." And he criticized former Georgia Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, writing, "You sadly are not a fighter," for declining to challenge the election results hours after the attack on the U.S. Capitol.
And I cannot now in good conscience object to the certification.
You have some really strong opinions. Do you think that you can keep an open heart and an open mind?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one thing about having strong opinions, is that my opinions can be changed based on facts. Hey, look, I'm going to propose my questions so it's not confrontational.
I think that's a good answer.
That's a good answer, right? That's what I want to do. I don't want to be, because that's not my goal.
It's now time for Mark to hit the road and put his promise of civility to the test. meeting his first expert here in Columbus, Georgia, at the Muskogee County Election Office. She's Nancy Boren, the county's election director for 26 years. She sits on Georgia's Elections Advisory Council and the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission, which helps set national standards.
Here he is. My blind date.
Good morning.
How are you?
Awesome. How are you?
I'm
Mark
good.
Nolan.
I'm Nancy Boren.
Mark wastes no time putting Nancy in the hot seat.
Ready to go?
First, asking about thousands of voters the Republican Party claimed should not have been on the registration rolls in 2020.
I'm actually holding a list of those over 4,000 registered Muskogee County voters who
Muskogee County historically leans Democrat. The county's GOP chairman initiated the challenge.
Can you let us know where that case finally closed on? I haven't been able to find it.
The Board of Elections voted to challenge all 4,000 of those voters. We were one of 2 counties in Georgia that followed on to that challenge. And they did it based on my recommendation. I went and looked at some of the voters, and it appeared that some of them had perhaps moved out of state. And so I presented that information to the Board of Elections, and that 5-member board voted unanimously to challenge all 4,000 of those voters.
Lawsuits and appeals were filed in federal court. In the end, Nancy verified nearly all of the challenged voters lived in the county and were eligible.
We had 2 voters that remained on that challenged list.
Out of the 4,000? Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Everyone else verified.
Next, Mark has questions about Georgia's voting machines it purchased from a company called Dominion.
Okay, I'm a technology guy, so.
He's not a fan, and he wishes all states used the same machines.
Can you imagine the firmware, the computer, the hardware, the voting machines that would be necessary for that? And I don't know that there's a company that's robust enough to do that at this point.
And we could put a man on the moon.
True, absolutely. And
do you believe we have a gold standard in the state of Georgia from what happened, from the results in 2020?
so I don't believe there is a gold standard of voting equipment. I think it has to be a combination of everything. I think it has to be voter usability, election official usability, safety, security, ability to transport. If you think about it, we conduct an election at the most 5 days a year, and that's in a presidential election. I'm confident in the outcome of the election from 2020.
Time to say goodbye to Nancy.
Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate your time.
And check in with Mark. All right, Mark, you just had your first interview with an expert. What did you think?
If Nancy is, Ms. Bourne's the same as everybody else, they should rest assured that, we are in good hands from the people who are running the elections committee things. I think some of the questions I challenged her on, she has some great answers. And I came away impressed.
After talking to Nancy, where's that confidence level?
And Nancy's confidence level, I'd say in her county, 100%.
Confident in Muskogee County's 2020 election results, but not statewide.
No, I don't have that same level of confidence.
Up next, Mark heads to the state capitol to sit down with Georgia's Secretary of State in charge of elections and a state employee he once attacked on social media.
So he wouldn't respond to me, right? And I threw something out there on Twitter. It was right after that, is pretty much when I got banned. The 20-yard punt. It's basically when we're warming up, it's just...
We're back.
See that?
With Mark Nolan, a voter doubtful of Georgia's 2020 election results.
I am skeptical.
So far, he's learned thousands of Muskogee County voters Republicans claimed were ineligible to vote because they allegedly lived out of state did live in the county, and why one of Georgia's most experienced election directors trusts the 2020 results.
I'm confident of our results, and I'm confident of the statewide results.
Up next, Mark heads here to the Georgia State Capitol. On deck, Secretary Brad Raffensperger, head of the state's elections. But first, Mark sits down with the Secretary's Chief Operating Officer, Gabriel Sterling. His previous role included implementing Georgia's Dominion voting machines, a job he admits he did not want. But the secretary says he couldn't find anyone else to do it at the time. He also passionately defended the 2020 election results and poll workers threatened by Trump supporters.
It has all gone too far.
A state employee, Mark criticized multiple times on Twitter, calling him a fraud and demanding he resign.
He's got no background in project management. He's got no background in software. He's got no background in hardware. But how did he get that job? So I asked him 4 or 5 times. He wouldn't respond to me, right? And I threw something out there on Twitter, and it was right after that is pretty much when I got banned.
Nearly a year later, he's meeting the man he attacked online in person.
How you doing, sir? Mr. Sterling? Gabe Sterling. Mark Nolan, nice to meet you. How are you?
Once settled in, most of Mark's questions do not focus on the 2020 election results or Gabriel's background. Instead, he spends his time asking about the state's previous voting systems, his displeasure with Georgia's voting machines, and its $107 million cost.
Do you really think that's good for the state of Georgia from the taxpayer standpoint?
No, we consider this contract to be very good for the taxpayers.
One of Mark's questions that did focus on 2020 centered on this letter by Governor Brian Kemp requesting the state's election board investigate claims that a private auditor identified 36 inconsistencies in Fulton County during the election.
Have you seen that report? Have you seen that document?
The secretary's office says it investigated and found no fraud.
It's sloppiness, irresponsibility. It's not Ocean's 11. They can't be irresponsible and not do a great job and then pull off the biggest heist in history. It's one or the other.
Next, Mark expresses security concerns with ballot drop boxes. The 2020 election was the first time they were ever used in Georgia.
I mean, we trust the Postal Service, right? So why did it have to happen now?
Frankly, we had COVID, and there was a lot of fear around the postal system, quite frankly. And it was driven by politics and some reality. And here's the thing, drop boxes are much better monitored than a USPS post office box. If somebody's ballot harvesting, they can just go drop it in there. There's no cameras or anything. So we had cameras, we required the cameras.
Mark's time with Gabriel comes to an end.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
And it's now time to interview his boss, Secretary Brad Raffensperger.
Morning, sir. How are you, sir?
Brad Raffensperger.
Brad Mark Nolan. Nice to meet you.
Over the past year, the secretary has repeatedly defended the 2020 election results.
I know there are people that are convinced the election was fraught with problems.
Most of that criticism coming from his own party, including former President Trump, who told him this over the phone after the election.
The people of Georgia are angry.
Mark asked the secretary about allegations of fraud and the outcome of the investigations.
So all those people that you have said we're going to go after from election fraud, I mean, they had to be adjudicated.
We still have open cases for 2020. And so our investigators are looking at that, and then as additional information it becomes available, then we open up an investigation. But we already brought many cases before the state election board, and they're working on closing up all those.
To close it out, do you believe that you have an honest and fair election that came out of the 2020?
I said there's never a perfect election.
Never a perfect election.
But every allegation that was made, we open up an investigation. People alleged 10,315 dead people. We found 4. My letter said 2, we found 2 more. But we run it down. And the reason that President Trump came up short, I think probably number 1, is that 28,000 people skipped the presidential ballot, and yet they voted down ballot. And I think that's the story of what happened in Georgia.
And I appreciate your time. You're an extremely busy man, so thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Mark, what did you think?
I think they gave me some great answers about how they believed that not just the Dominion system, but how all the counties performed and how they as an organization performed their duties. I think they're all spot on.
On social media, you called Gabriel Sterling a fraud. Do you still believe that? I
wouldn't use fraud. He did not belong in that role as a project manager, implementation manager. He was in a role, Andy, that he had no prior experience in or knowledge in.
Coming up, Mark meets the state's expert who oversees Georgia's voting machines.
So how would you explain all the irregularities that have been identified, such as?
It's the last leg of Mark Nolan's journey learning more about Georgia's 2020 election results, an outcome he did not trust when we first met him.
Why was 2020 so bad?
Today, he'll learn more about the state's voting machines at the center of cybersecurity concerns.
Those cybersecurity experts are sounding the alarm about Georgia's voting system.
And baseless conspiracy theories.
The Dominion machine that's as filled with holes as Swiss cheese and was developed to steal elections.
Dominion declined to participate, citing pending lawsuits against Fox News, Rudy Giuliani, and the CEO of MyPillow.
I've been all in trying to find the machine fraud.
But Mark meets the next best thing.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
Good morning. How are you? Good.
Michael Barnes.
Michael Mark Nolan.
Michael Barnes is the director of the Center for Elections. He's been with the Secretary of State's office since 1998. Michael trains county election workers how to use the Dominion machines, builds the ballots for each election, and tests the equipment. Grateful for Michael's expertise, but disappointed in Dominion's decision.
So I got you. It's not a downside, right?
Well, I hope not.
No.
Mark asked Michael if the election equipment is ever connected to the internet before or during the 2020 election.
The state's computer that's used to build election management projects are not connected to the internet in any way, shape, or form. The election management computer that is stored at the county location is not connected to the internet.
Michael then tells Mark that the ballot scanners and the ballot marking devices are never connected to the internet. The only device that is, the polling pads, used to check in voters, not count ballots.
That is the only piece that has any type of connection in what you are outlining. That's it.
So how would you explain all the irregularities that have been identified, such as voter tabulation, malfunctions? I always hear it's human error. I mean, that's always a great fallback.
I've been working in elections for over 20 years now, and we've never had a perfect election. And I don't think that there will ever be a perfect election. And what happens with a lot of elections operations are people are trying to get done as fast as they can. And speed sometimes can be the enemy of accuracy. And what we have always tried to tell county election officials is that it's not about being done first, it's about getting things done right and taking your time.
Coming up, Mark's journey comes to a conclusion. After everything you've learned, are you still skeptical of the 2020 election results? The big reveal, next.
Perfecto. Perfecto. Perfect ball.
Nearly a month after meeting Mark Nolan, his journey to learn more about Georgia's 2020 election comes to a conclusion. All right, Mark. Here we are. We've come full circle. We're back in your kitchen.
Absolutely.
I've introduced you to 4 experts: the Director of Elections in Columbus, Georgia, the Chief Operating Officer at the Secretary of State's office, his boss, Brad Raffensperger, and the Director at the Center for Elections. After everything you've learned, are you still skeptical of the 2020 election results?
Yes and no.
Oh.
Yes and no.
What's the no?
The no is that when I spoke with Ms. Boren, that young lady was extremely knowledgeable in her day-to-day operations, was extremely professional in her knowledge of election systems. She has been around the block.
So you're confident in the results?
I'm confident in the tabulated results that were done in the areas of what Secretary of State Raffensperger told me about and what Nancy Boren told me about. I'm confident that all those things happened.
So what's the yes part?
The yes part is the other side of that, okay? So let's talk about Mr. Sterling. From my evidence-based discussions I had with him, that I think that he was the wrong man for that job.
Walk me through why you're a little skeptical, because Gabriel Sterling, in your belief, didn't have the background to be the implementation manager, but you can say that you are confident in the results of the election.
The confidence of the result and the confidence of the process of how the elections were handled are two different things.
Based on what you know now, do you regret any of the social media posts that you posted?
Sure. I mean, if they were derogatory, if you're asking me to apologize.
Oh, I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm just seeing if you can see your own evolution that I've and
yes.
witnessing.
Yes, oh, absolutely. You know, the word evolve that you and I talked about, the more data one gets, the more one gets evolved in their data.
So you're saying you've evolved.
Yeah, I've evolved in a lot of things.
Now trusting of the 2020 election results with a better understanding of the process and just maybe a little more about himself.
I would hope people take away that they have to stop looking at the TV, stop listening to politicians, stop listening to things how they think are done, and think for themselves.
A message from one voter who feels understood, something we can all relate to no matter where our politics lean. I want to thank Mark and all of the experts for participating. He spent an hour each with all of them. You can watch all of his unedited interviews in this story on 11alive.com. Thanks for watching Drawing Conclusions.